Hi, my name is Nicole S. Brown, and the topic that I selected is divorce. It is a risk factor that impacts children and families as it has the potential to create vulnerability to both physical and mental illnesses that can sometimes originate through traumatic loss from one or both parents through divorce. What is divorce? According to the APA, divorce is the legal dissolution of marriage. It leaves both parents or partners free to remarry. Divorce significantly influences the well being, not just that of the parents involved, but also children, which also results in depression, loneliness, isolation, self esteem difficulties, and other psychological distress. Parental divorce has also been known to have negative consequences on psychosocial adjustment of children. That is one of the recurring themes that I found in this research is that adjustment of the child also is the biggest factor and it trickles down into the other issues of concern. What is the scope or problem? Children across the world experience family instability due to divorce, separation, and the consequences of non-marital childbearing cohabitation. This then leads to adverse effects, both mentally, emotionally, and with sometimes behavior. Research shows that there is a reciprocal relationship between divorce, separation, desertion, and vulnerable outcomes, as mentioned, such as psychiatric disturbances and aversion to marriage, behavior problems, risky behavior, and emotional wellness. One of the things that I saw or that I found was that the topic of aversion to marriage stems from our attitudes and behaviors as parents and or family systems that are sometimes passed down transgenerationally. So the things or the adverse effects that one feels as a result of divorce can then be transmitted to our children and then to their children. So research also shows that structure or family structure is one of the determinants of a child's social, mental, and emotional well-being. It greatly impacts the success of the child. Another topic or factor that I found was that children reared in households where there are two biological parents that are not children who are not reared in households where there are not two biological parents will present or exhibit lower levels of well-being than that of their counterparts. Some of the demographics are in 2021, 689,308 divorces occurred across 45 states in the US. And during that same year, there were a lot of marriages, which I'm happy to read and report, making marriage 6 per 1,000 people. And actually, what I found is that the divorce rates in the United States have significantly gone down. However, there are still adverse effects of divorce, and that impacts society and our population as it regarding public health. So, who are at risk? Who are the most at risk? Divorce rates are higher among couples below the poverty line. Living below the poverty line can cause enormous stress, which ultimately have consequences on marriage. One study found that as many as 46% of adults ages 18 to 55 who live below the poverty level have divorced by age 19. And this is all due to cultural norms, marital values, socioeconomic status, and systemic biases that impact and impede upon marriages and divorce. One of the facts that I found or that resonated with me is the divorce rate for Black couples is 30.8%, and the marriage rate is 17.3%. And one of this is because of the systemic biases and because of socioeconomic status. And what this resonates for me is that there are resources that should be readily available to couples to help mitigate against poverty, against stress, against mental illnesses, and things like that. Surprisingly, the United States did not rank the highest in divorces. The top 13 countries are presented below. Actually, the country that ranked the highest is the Maldives, and this was in part because of infidelity. Now we get into the history, which is very interesting. Like most things in the States or America, it has brought over by the early colonists who migrated over into the States. So the history of divorce is because of the Reformation by the Puritans. The Puritans are a group of English Protestants who deemed themselves holier than that of their counterparts. And they focused on, in the 16th and 17th century, they regarded the Reformation of the Church of England under Elizabeth as incomplete. So they sought to purify it and to simplify it and to regulate it as a form of worship. But also, they did not regard marriage and divorce as a religious as religious. What they did is they regarded it as a civil duty, so they treated it as such. They wanted to separate it from the church and make it a state issue. And so, following Martin Luther, who was a Protestant, one of the Puritans, was Herbert Zwingli. He also had similar but different views concerning governing with the church and state. And so he established the first Reformation marriage court, which gave the court jurisdiction over divorce as well as marriage in 1525. At this time, divorce was only granted for adultery and desertion. So this was the at fault type of divorce that was most common within society. You had to have offended your marriage partner in a way where it was infidelity. And that was the biggest thing. Marriage was sort of put in the hands of men. Women weren't yet granted the opportunity for divorce as much as it was in the power of men. So colonial Puritans migrated to Massachusetts Bay Colony, and with their migration, they took most of their practices with them. This included their ideology and practices of marriage and divorce. And so the first record of divorce in the American colonies is Anne Clark of Massachusetts Bay. She was granted a divorce because her husband, Dennis Clark, at the time had taken another wife, and he also had children outside of their wedlock. So the Puritans, the Puritans at that time looked upon this act as heinous, and they punished him and granted her a divorce. So some of the changes of divorce through the ages, through time and history, is after the Revolution, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts gave the state court's jurisdiction over divorce. In 1803, the Commonwealth of Virginia began to grant divorces, but only by the legislative act. And this was in part because a lot of slave owners' wives were having children with some of the slaves, and this was creating mixed race children. And so in this instance, they were granting divorces because of that. So then we get into the Married Women's Act of 1839. As I said, a lot of the power of divorce was placed in the hands of men, so this gave the women right to sue for divorce. And by the 20th century, divorce began to rise. It was governed by state rather than federal law. The same with current day. States have their own governors and their own interpretation and their own thoughts on how divorce should be presented and governed. By 1960, the National Association of Women's Lawyers was instrumental in convincing the American Bar Association to create family law and push strongly for the no-fault divorce. Before, you had to have had some type of infidelity, but now it was pushing towards unhappiness or incompatibility and things like that. Since the 1980s, federal legislation has been enacted affecting the rights and responsibilities of divorcing spouses. So this then goes into divorce and child custody. When the child's legal parents split up, a decision has to be made about child custody. And this is where we get into the adjustment of the child. This impacts them emotionally and mentally because they are separated and it's not necessarily where the child wants to go. The courts kind of decided based on the best interest of the child. So the child is placed in the best home based on the socioeconomic status, the mental capacity of the parent, just basically who is doing the best for the child. According to the APA, divorce may influence the well-being and present depression, loneliness, and isolation. It is important to recognize the critical need to help children with adjustment. So some of the services that I found at the national level, the National Parents Organization, what they do is they promote shared parenting by educating parents of divorce, providing professional support, and also engaging in legislation and reforming acts to help family courts make better choices and provide better resources for families so that they can enhance shared parenting to keep parenting together to impact the child positively. I am from Pennsylvania and I found a ton of resources. So some of them I have listed here and I found that they are very beneficial and they help the family and the child in a holistic manner. Interventions. This is really what I was looking forward to. And when I conceptualized it at a micro level, what I did is I looked at the emotional, physical, and social, mental, and behavioral effects of divorce on children. And what I would do is I would initially assess the thoughts and feelings of the child by using cognitive therapy and sometimes behavioral therapy. The child's microsystem usually consists of their immediate caregivers. And as we know, relationships are bidirectional. So it's really important to assess how the child feels because sometimes they can think that it's their fault or they had something to do with it or they are the cause of this divorce, which can be problematic because it then creates behavioral challenges in that child. So the intervention I would use is cognitive behavioral therapy to kind of challenge the stigma behind divorce, as well as challenge irrational and self-destructive thoughts and behaviors that impact the emotions of the child. At the meso level, the goal is to treat and provide care for the child using their family systems via agency and community. So I found this really great program called Kids in the Middle. And what they do is they treat the child holistically by using all of the community resources they have. They have a state mandated co-parenting education class. They provide counseling and they also engage in community and professional education as well. At the macro level, one of the facts that I found is that 50% of youth in the U.S. experience parental divorce. The effect of divorce include family strained and as a result have overburdened parents for multiple reasons. So at the macro level, some of the implications are for service and policy are that in order to have a significant impact on public health, programs should be widely available. So this can be done by providing education and support to families. Some of the resources that I found was through family support programs on the government website. And one of them in particular that really stood out was the family checkup for families and young children. And what this does is this addresses the concerns before serious problems happen, or they focus on kind of limiting children at risk for unfavorable outcomes. And what they do is they kind of focus on the family and provide resources to decrease any negative outcomes, any externalizing programs, and and this is at the national level, so anyone can find this as well. So the conclusion that I found is that one, women are historically vulnerable to stigma. They are devalued because of divorce, and what this then does is creates mental health issues. And based on research, mental health issues have been treated by tons of professionals, and they found that this is due to transference. Our attitudes often are a sense of stability in society. And what this has shown is that family attitudes tend to be transmitted across generations. So what we have to do to kind of mitigate against this is reduce the stigma and provide programs that are widely accessible to our families to help the children of divorced families who suffer from adjustment, as well as the stigma, as well as social difficulties that have been at higher rates.